Let me tell you something. When was the last time you saw this government back down? When was the last time Keir Starmer looked a legal challenge in the eye and blinked? Well, it happened today, and the man who made it happen is Nigel Farage. Reform UK has just delivered one of the most significant democratic victories this country has seen in years. And the establishment is absolutely reeling. Here's what went down.
Well, it was extraordinary. I mean, last year we saw cancellations of elections without any real exceptional reason. This year, up to 30 councils, 4.6 million people denied the vote. In some cases, Norfolk, Suffolk, East and West Sussex, this would have been the second year in a row that people who are paying their council tax would have been denied the chance to vote. So that's why we took them to the High Court. We were due there this Thursday. They've caved, they've collapsed. It's a victory for reform, but more importantly, it's a victory for democracy in this country. We are delighted.
As you say, you felt so strongly about this, you were going to take the government's calls over this. The fact that they have U-turned on this before you got your day in court, what do you make of that, and why did you feel strongly enough to take them to court in the first place?
Well, I think the principle of no taxation without representation is a very well-known one through political history, and that's what was happening here. We'd even seen a few people starting to refuse to pay their council tax up and down the country. But what I do think now is the Minister, Steve Reid, has clearly acted illegally, and given that the government has now given in, knew they'd lose to us in court, I think Steve Reid's question as a minister should now be debated.
The Labour government, in all its arrogance, decided to delay local elections across up to 30 councils, stripping 4.6 million people of their democratic right to vote. 4.6 million people who are still paying their council tax, still being governed, still being taxed, but told, no, sorry, you don't get a say this year, in Norfolk, in Suffolk, in East and West Sussex. Some of these areas were facing the second consecutive year of cancelled elections, the second year in a row. Just think about that for a moment. Now, where were the Conservatives on this? Talking a good game in the House of Commons, with senior shadow minister after shadow minister standing up to say how outrageous it was, while 5 of their own council areas were quietly doing exactly the same thing. Where were the Liberal Democrats? Delaying elections in Cheltenham, thank you very much. The very parties screaming about democracy were burying it quietly in the background. Absolute hypocrites, the lot of them. But reform went to the High Court. They took this government to judicial review, due to be heard this Thursday. And what happened? The government folded. They collapsed. They withdrew from the case before they even got their day in court, because they knew, their own lawyers knew, and even the boss of the Electoral Commission had already stated publicly that what they were doing was illegal. Steve Reid, the minister responsible for this mess, acted unlawfully. And now the government is paying reform's legal fees. They caved completely. Farage stood there in Romford today and called it exactly what it is. A victory for democracy. And he's right. This isn't just a political win for reform, though it absolutely is that. This is about a principle that goes back centuries in this country. No taxation without representation. You cannot take money from people and simultaneously deny them the vote. It is that simple. It is that fundamental. And yet somehow, in 2025, under a Labour government that promised change and delivered control, it took a political party that's barely 2 years old to stand up and say, not on our watch. Now, the reaction from some quarters has been predictable. Oh, it's going to cost £63 million to hold these elections. Reform should apologise to taxpayers. That was actually put to Farage in an interview today. And his response was magnificent. What price freedom? What price the 1.25 million people who died in 2 world wars so that this country could call itself a democracy? You don't put a price on that. You don't apologise for defending the basic rights of British citizens. The audacity of asking the man who fought for those rights to say sorry for it. And here's the kicker. While all this was playing out legally, Reform were in Romford holding a rally. And 2 more Conservative councillors walked through the door. Robert Benham and Christine Vickery, Havering Borough councillors, have defected to Reform. Farage said it himself 18 months ago. Reform would replace the Conservative Party. It's not a boast anymore. It's just what's happening. The government tried to steal democracy. Reform took them to court. And democracy won. 4.6 million people. Just let that number sit with you for a second. 4.6 million British citizens who were going to be denied the vote, not because of a pandemic, not because of a national emergency, not because of some extraordinary crisis that made holding elections physically impossible. No, because it was politically convenient. Because Labour councils in the north of England didn't fancy their chances. Because Conservative-run Norfolk and Suffolk wanted to delay the reckoning. Because the establishment parties across the political divide colluded to protect their own seats by cancelling the democratic process altogether. And they thought they'd get away with it. That is the story that isn't being told loudly enough today. Yes, the headlines are about Reform's victory. Yes, the headlines are about Farage humiliating Starmer and forcing a humiliating U-turn. All of that is true, and all of that matters. But the deeper story, the one that should genuinely terrify every person in this country, regardless of how they vote, is that multiple parties, Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, quietly agreed amongst themselves to deny millions of people their democratic rights. Not one of them stood up and said this is wrong until Reform marched into the High Court and forced their hand. Think about what Farage actually said when pressed on the costs. The government folded so completely that they agreed to pay Reform's legal fees. Zero cost to Reform. And then a journalist had the nerve to suggest that Farage should apologise because holding elections costs £63 million. £63 million. In a country that spends billions every single year, that borrows hundreds of billions, that hands out foreign aid and funds net zero vanity projects and pays for diversity consultants across every public body in the land. £63 million to uphold the foundational principle of democratic government is apparently where we draw the line. The sheer brass neck of it. And Steve Reed. Let's talk about Steve Reed, the minister who pushed this through. The Electoral Commission, the independent body whose entire purpose is to safeguard elections in this country, publicly stated that what the government was doing was illegal. The government's own lawyers, it now emerges, believed the same. And yet Reed pressed ahead. He tried to cancel elections for millions of people in defiance of the law. Farage is calling it a resignation matter, and he's absolutely right. When a minister acts illegally, when a minister strips citizens of the right to vote while continuing to charge them council tax, the correct response is not a quiet U-turn on a Monday afternoon. The correct response is resignation, full stop. But don't hold your breath. This is a Labour government that has made an art form out of accountability avoidance. They'll quietly swallow this defeat, spin it as a sensible administrative decision, and hope the news cycle moves on by Wednesday. That's the playbook. That's always the playbook. Meanwhile, back in Romford, Reform were doing what Reform have been doing at an extraordinary pace. Growing. Robert Benham and Christine Vickery, both sitting Conservative councillors on Havering Borough Council, stood alongside Farage today and made it official. They're Reform now. And these aren't just warm bodies filling a quota. These are experienced local politicians who know how the council system works, who understand the debt crisis gripping Havering, who've seen from the inside how broken local government has become. Farage made the point himself. Reform has energy and ideas, but what it's lacked is experience. These defections plug that gap. And the Conservatives should be absolutely terrified by what's happening in Havering. This is London. This isn't a Northern Heartland constituency or a rural shire that's been drifting rightward for years. This is a London borough, and Reform are eyeing it with serious intent, talking openly about winning control of the council, talking about the debt, talking about slimming down a bloated local government bureaucracy and delivering real savings for residents who've watched their council tax spiral upward year after year. Now, Reform face a significant logistical challenge. Nearly 900 new candidates needed across 30 additional council areas, on top of everything they were already preparing for. Farage was characteristically unbothered. Biggest membership of any party in the country, he said. Professionalising fast. They'll be ready for May the 7th. The question now isn't whether Reform can field the candidates. The question is whether the British public, in area after area after area, is finally ready to use those ballot papers, the ones that almost got taken away, to send a message that cannot be ignored. Here's where we are. A government that came to power promising change has just been dragged into the High Court by a party that didn't even exist in its current form 2 years ago, and lost. Didn't just lose on a technicality, lost so badly, so completely, so indefensibly that they pulled out before the hearing even happened, paid the other side's legal fees, reinstated 30 elections covering 4.6 million people, and are now sitting in Whitehall hoping nobody notices quite how catastrophic this moment actually is. But people are noticing. That's what's changed. Because this wasn't just a legal battle, this was a test of something far more fundamental, whether the British establishment, when it gets comfortable enough, when it feels untouchable enough, will simply help itself to powers it was never entitled to. And the answer, it turns out, is yes. Given half a chance, they absolutely will. Labour did it, Conservatives enabled it, Liberal Democrats participated in it. The entire political class looked at 4.6 million people and decided their votes were an inconvenience to be managed rather than a right to be protected. And the only party that stood in the way was Reform. Now, I know what some people will say at this point. They'll say Farage is doing this for the cameras. They'll say Reform are opportunists who spotted a headline and chased it. Let them say it, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter why you fight for something. It matters that you fought. Those 4.6 million people are getting their vote back. The minister who acted illegally is facing calls to resign. The government has been publicly humiliated on a matter of basic constitutional principle. Results matter, and Reform delivered results. Let's also talk about what this means going into May the 7th, because the political implications here are enormous. Reform were already preparing for a significant set of local elections. Now they've added nearly 900 candidates across 30 additional council areas. That is a massive organisational challenge, but it's also a massive opportunity. Every one of those 30 areas is now a battleground where Reform can plant a flag, build a local presence, and demonstrate that they are not just a protest movement or a pressure group, but a genuine governing force at the local level. Look at what Farage said about Havering. The council is drowning in debt. Council tax has been rising year after year. Residents are furious. And now 2 experienced Conservative councillors have crossed the floor to join Reform, bringing with them institutional knowledge and local credibility. Farage is talking about slimming down the bureaucracy, finding real savings, running a leaner and more efficient local government. Whether you believe he can deliver it or not, at least someone is saying it. At least someone is turning up with a plan beyond managed decline and a hand permanently outstretched towards central government. And that contrast between a Labour government that cancels elections and a Reform movement that goes to court to restore them is going to follow Keir Starmer for the rest of his political life. His approval rating is already in the gutter. This doesn't help. Every time a voter in Norfolk or Suffolk or East Sussex gets their polling card through the door, they're going to remember that this government tried to take that away, that it took a legal challenge from the opposition to force it back. That the Prime Minister, the man who stood on the steps of Downing Street and talked about service and integrity, presided over a minister acting illegally to cancel democratic elections.